Hey everybody, this is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Good to be with you again. Right now, we've got the most extraordinary circumstances happening in the United States of America, where we've got new questions about the fitness of the commander-in-chief, but it also goes back to the way in which this administration has targeted its enemies with lawfare. Erik, you had an extraordinary experience, I know, going to see a good friend of yours off to prison. Steve Bannon, the host of War Room with Stephen K. Bannon, which is a popular podcast among the MAGA conservatives across the country. He's like the field marshal for the grassroots for Donald Trump and this extraordinary populist movement. Bannon, of course, would not cooperate with the January 6th committee, so he was charged with contempt of Congress for denying their subpoena. And he's only this third person in history, I believe, who's been put in jail over a contempt of Congress charge. You obviously demonstrating a tremendous act of friendship by being there with Steve as he went off to prison. And I know off-leash viewers want to hear what that was like and what happened.
Well, I was certainly there in solidarity with Steve. I think it's important for friends, I guess you truly show friendship by showing up in the shittiest of times, and having to report to prison definitely tops that list. The disgusting thing about Steve's case is that he wasn't even allowed to conduct a proper defense. The judge did not even allow him to explain the fact that he was listening to the advice of his counsel in not answering that subpoena. He had offered documents. He'd offered his attorney to go talk to him, but he was not even allowed a full and proper defense in that case, in a highly partisanized, weaponized case, in the same way they went after him on anything else. And, conveniently, they've now locked him up for all of July, August, September, October, and he gets out about 1 week before the 2024 election, trying to silence his voice and his He's a very clever thinker on strategy and unpacking the issues and certainly the strategies of the left. Steve was very much himself the entire day. He did his show from 10 till about 11:15 from a nearby hotel conference room, and then shifted to a mini rally of a lot of supporters that just showed up across the street from the courthouse, or across the street from the prison, and carried forth, effectively had a press conference there. And then we got into Suburban with his attorney, Bernie Carrick, and I. Bernie was the former commissioner of New York Police Department, was actually the new commissioner when 9/11 happened. And we took him off to his first day of prison, and he was checked in, and he'll be there for the next 120 days.
I want our viewers to sort of see what it was like. We've got a sizzle reel from Real America's Voice. Let's take a quick look at it.
Steve Bannon is headed to prison for his refusal to cooperate with the January 6th Congressional Committee investigation.
I don't give two about going to Danbury prison, okay? I could care less.
I'm a political prisoner of Joe Biden and the corrupt Biden establishment.
Our protection against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. Amen.
I'm proud of going to prison.
Take good care of him, or there'll be accountability for that as well.
So, Erik, obviously that sort of takes people there to see what it was like. Tremendous crowd turned out for Steve, obviously. A lot of media were there to capture that moment. Why don't you take us there at that moment during the press conference?
Well, it was pretty raucous. There was a few professional trolls, the people that show up and protest Bannon everywhere, but that was probably 1 or 2% of the crowd, and the rest of them were great supporters of both President Trump and Steve Bannon and his message, and the reminders of the reason of why people are against the political elites of the Democrat Party, and the cost that they've imposed on our society and the cultural degradation that they've dragged us down. And, Steve reminded people of what of what America should be like versus what it's becoming under a completely failed, wacky Democrat leadership. And it was especially surreal comparing being in Dansbury, Connecticut, taking him to a prison just days after a complete debacle of a presidential debate where clearly one of the candidates is not all there mentally. And then you just wonder who the hell is actually running the United States government right now. And it just unpacks all kinds of other constitutional issues. So it was it's a dark day when you see someone go to prison for pure politics. And, you know, the left calls him a traitor and they call him all kinds of pejoratives. The fact is, Steve is a military veteran who served his country in uniform and has been serving since, trying to organize proper economic political populism to care about the normal people in America, not the coastal elites, not the hedge fund managers, and not the Democratic Party and union bosses that are dragging America down into the depths of hell, and making people suffer under inflation. So, you know, those are not paid supporters that showed up to rally for Steve Bannon yesterday outside of a prison in Connecticut. Those are normal Americans that care about the future, and it's going to be a wild summer.
Yeah, well, you know, look, Steve defied the subpoena from the January 6th committee. Tim Parlatore is a great attorney, has done work for President Trump. Tim actually represented Commissioner Carrick. Bernie is a good friend of mine, is a good friend of yours, before the January 6th committee. And Tim was smart. Tim was able to sort of break down and demonstrate to the committee that they were not authorized to conduct depositions or issue subpoenas because they were not properly and formally structured as a committee. If you recall, Kevin McCarthy submitted Republican minority members from the congressional minority to that committee, and Nancy Pelosi rejected them outright. And McCarthy said, fine, you're not getting any members and you don't really have a committee. Steve, of course, got caught up in that. And yet they want Steve to be a martyr. They wanted him off the playing field for this presidential election so he can't organize the grassroots. But he was very, very defiant, as we could see from that sizzle reel, and made it very clear his voice will be heard. You cannot kill his First Amendment rights, even from behind prison walls.
Yeah, and his daughter Maureen Bannon is managing the show now, and he's got a lot of very capable co-hosts lined up on a rotating basis to keep hammering.
Look, Erik, obviously Bannon is the leader of the movement and will dedicate every fiber of his soul to save America this fall. The show will go on, and it's a countdown basically of 120 days until he's back in the saddle. I think it's an important platform, frankly, for people to get their information and guidance and direction. But this lawfare is as troubling as it can be. And what's outrageous is, as you mentioned earlier, we had the most remarkable display of and lack of cognitivity from the commander-in-chief the other night. And it's he and his henchmen who have conducted this lawfare.
Yeah, look, Steve has definitely made a plan for continuity. He has multiple other hosts that will cover for him. His daughter, Maureen, is also a military veteran, will stand in and run the War Room Posse. The law says that Steve is not permitted to do his job while in prison, so he can't be seen to be communicating or guiding or leading the show. But I think certainly the staff that they have and the fellow hosts, et cetera, will carry that ball effectively. What it really means, though, is and what Steve kept harping on yesterday is how do we make this stop? Because the lawfare and the nonsense will continue until it's made to stop. And so that really comes to, how do you rein in these federal agencies? How do you literally clean out? And so a couple of the Supreme Court decisions of the last few days really affect that. One of them being the presidential immunity, that any official act done by the president while as president provides them immunity, which should give them much greater leeway to fire, to relocate bureaucracies, and to clean out this fetid swamp that is Washington, D.C. The other one that we need to talk about is the Chevron deference case. In this case, there were some New England fishermen who were being bankrupted because the fisheries department was charging them $700 a day to pay for some federal bureaucrat to ride along and inspect each of the catches on a boat. And in many cases, they were sending inexperienced people that had no business being on boats, who were a menace to themselves and the crew. And this so-called rule was made by a federal bureaucracy that had never been voted on, never debated in Congress, never signed into law. And that is the kind of nonsense that started with the Chevron case. And that was back in 1984. It was Chevron versus the Natural Resource Defense Council. And in that case, the Supreme Court sided with the EPA, and it basically gave them an inch to make rules, effectively to make law. And the federal bureaucracy from there has grown that into tens of thousands of new pages of laws by an administrative procedure, not passed into a law by Congress, but instead punted to a federal agency, to permanent unelected bureaucrats, to write laws on everything from wetlands, land use, safety regulations at home for appliances, to emissions controls for vehicles, to you name it. Almost any federal law or federal regulation that you encounter has not been passed into law as in voted by Congress. It's instead been created by federal bureaucrats. And so the court throwing that out, and it was thrown out 6-3, super, a significant majority to change that. And that is a huge step for liberty, for freedom, to start to pare down the regulatory state. So in the good fortune that Trump is elected in October, I think we actually have a path for the first time, if Trump staffs his administration with the right kind of people that are ready to go to work and clean out the permanent state unelected bureaucracy that just makes America not anything like the founding fathers ever intended. What that also requires is clear, large majorities in both the House and the Senate, because otherwise one party will hold up and object. And so you can imagine the federal bureaucracy and the Democrats and all the people that are on the take in this massive wealth redistribution from Washington will fight that absolutely tooth and nail, but it may actually provide a window. The first in election and getting Trump elected, getting clear majorities, fantastic victory. But that is merely one step in a long, long journey of hard work to severely constrain this runaway government. The biggest problem and where we can have the most effect is in the power of the purse, and just cutting off and zeroing out some of these runaway, unnecessary, dictatorial federal agencies. And people say, well, we want to, we're not going to defund any police, but I think it's appropriate that certain functions, to include the FBI, doesn't have to continue as the FBI as we see it, but the FBI counterterrorism or the FBI counterintelligence can continue under one federal agency, and major crimes, maybe that goes back to the U.S. Marshals the same way it was in the early 1900s. So the functions of federal law enforcement can continue, but under different management of different federal agencies, because I think the FBI has proven now to be a highly corrupted, highly politicized, weaponized against one political party. And when the Department of Justice, I think the political contributions go about 97% to Democrats, 3% to Republicans, it's not an organization that is cutting straight down the middle.
Yeah, and you brought attention to this immunity case that came out of the Supreme Court as well. And these all sort of tie in together, interestingly. The overreach of government to persecute political prisoners, just like Steve Bannon, and then also small businesses, just like they have for 40 years under the Chevron deference rule. Now we've got this ruling on the immunity case, which of course the Trump campaign has been eagerly awaiting because we anticipated it would go Trump's way. It was almost a slam dunk. It certainly pushes off Jack Smith's bogus case against Trump so that there will not be a trial before the election in November. Now, here's what's hysterical. This has been a very, very bad week for Democrats. In this, you got Justice Sotomayor talks about, in her dissenting opinion, she talks about how, well, now a president of the United States can, basically assassinate their political opponent without any consequence, without any chance of prosecution. Let's talk a little bit about the outrageousness of the left melting down over this, particularly when we see we don't really have a commander-in-chief at the moment.
Yeah, we really don't have a commander-in-chief, and it was shocking. I watched that debate with my kids, and we were dumbstruck to see him just looking off into space and having multiple incoherent answers. And then you come away with even the left media freaking out, saying, holy cow, that was really bad. And then they're calling for him to step down. And now they've pivoted back to, oh, no, he's staying, he's fine. And that's the horse we're going to ride to extinction. I do a bit of skydiving. That Joe Biden is like a bad parachute they need to cut away. For all the nonsense of the 25th Amendment they talked about invoking against Donald J. Trump, that they don't talk to it now is just, it is incredible. It is beyond credible. They have no credibility anymore. These are the same people that told us about a shot we had to take for COVID, and that there's massive climate change coming, and they need to rule our lives and change the kind of energy we use or what kind of car we drive. And now they want to tell us that their presidential candidate is great now, even though, 51 million people watched that debate? 51 million people's eyes can't lie. And if you come away from that debate thinking that all is right at the White House, you have a serious mental deficiency yourself. To me, the real villain here is Jill Biden, because she has the will to power. She pushed her husband into running in 20. And now for her to think that she wants the American people to be led by that level of incoherence, it's very much like the last 6 months of Woodrow Wilson's administration, because he had a massive stroke and his wife basically seized control, kept the husband isolated, and ran the country for the last 6 months of Woodrow Wilson. So probably Woodrow Wilson's wife is really the first American president, and Jill Biden would be the second female American president.
Yeah. So here we have the left, starting with Sotomayor, talking about what Trump can be able to kill his opponent with impunity. And yet we've got the media, all the national Democrats who could have pushed him aside, Biden, from being on the ticket 8-9 months ago. They chose not to. They were going to stick with him. They are stuck, Erik. They are thoroughly stuck, and they deserve to be. I have a good conservative friend of mine who says to me, oh, boy, I feel so sad for Joe Biden. I don't whatsoever. He put himself in this position. He is well enough to continue to serve as president. He certainly has been for the last 3.5 years. These people have created this dynamic where they put our national security at risk, knowing darn well this man wasn't up to the task, and now they are genuinely stuck. They cannot take him off the ticket. I don't care how much they talk about it or how much they try. It can't be done at this point, and he's also not going to give it up.
Well, Jill, like I said, Joe Biden has the will to power, and I think she gets very used to the trappings. There's an interesting and horrifying new article on the Biden presidency in Vogue magazine, and it talks about arriving with a motorcade and all the trappings of power, and I think they've gotten used to that. And so if Jill Biden and Hunter Biden are the two loudest advocates for Biden to continue the presidency, it is truly madness, and it is a scary day for the Republic.
Here's the exit question for you, Erik. Watching that debate, we weren't the only ones aghast, although it wasn't shocking for us. It was just shocking for the media who've been covering up for him. How about our adversaries around the world? What do you think does that impact their decision making?
I would put it in hockey parlance that it's like they're shooting at an open goal, because they truly have a national security apparatus that is not up to it in America, with a president that doesn't have any kind of clear decision making. Even if he's lucid for a few minutes a day when he's super doped up on Adderall, imagine him and Kamala Harris being the decision makers on whether there's a incoming nuclear strike, or and the way they've pushed and pushed and pushed and challenged Russia, and now allowing the Ukrainians to use U.S. weapons to strike targets inside of Russia. It is totally unnecessarily escalatory and dangerous. And these people are truly endangering us all. And November cannot come soon enough to get rid of the idiocy that is prevailing in America. And as I travel around the world and I meet foreigners from all over, they are truly concerned. They say, what has happened to America? Because you've just so completely lost your way. So elections have to have consequences. Shame on the left for loving power so much that they would stay with someone who is clearly not mentally up to the task.
Well, there's so much more to come on this as the left melts down, as their grip on power is slipping from their fingers, thanks to some Supreme Court decisions. They may have put Steve Bannon in jail for 4 months. It's not going to hold back this movement, or Donald Trump, who may also, by the way, get a jail sentence pretty soon in a New York court. But more to come on the next segment with Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Thanks for joining us.